No one was ever supposed to see her. Not the neighbors passing the winding dirt roads, not the distant relatives visiting for polite dinners, and certainly not the children, who played freely in the sunlit fields beyond the house. Catherine. Abernathy lived in a space where she was both present and entirely denied, a child whose very existence was a secret meticulously enforced by those who should have loved her. The hidden wing of the Abernathy plantation was a place of shadow and restraint. Its shutters were always drawn, letting in only thin slices of light that fell across worn floorboards and faded wallpaper. The air was thick with candle smoke, the scent of old wood, and the quiet weight of untold stories. Catherine moved with practiced caution through its corridors, aware of every sound, the shuffle of a maid's feet, the soft murmur of voices carried down hallways, even the faint tapping of her own heartbeat. She had learned early that observation was survival. Agnes, the housemaid who had been with the family for decades, was her constant guardian. She taught Catherine to read and write, to sew delicate patterns into fabric, and to understand the small, secret garden just beyond the shuttered windows. But each lesson came with a warning. "Speak carelessly, and they will pretend you never lived," Agnes would murmur. Every glance, every word, and every movement had to be measured against this invisible threat. William Abernathy, Catherine's father, was a man of iron control. His wealth and reputation in Georgia were paramount, and he tolerated nothing that might tarnish the family image. Catherine's existence had been judged a liability the moment she was born. Mary Ann, her mother, had been delicate, intelligent and fragile, but her union with William produced a daughter who could not be acknowledged publicly. Catherine's life, confined to the hidden wing, was a product of calculated erasure, a cruel form of love that hid her in plain sight. Isolation sharpened Catherine's mind in ways that ordinary childhood never could. She observed the smallest details, the way a servant lingered too long near the doorway, the subtle expressions on her siblings' faces, the slight hesitation in her father's voice when he occasionally passed through the hall. She learned that survival required attention, intuition, and restraint. Every glance, every gesture carried meaning. Even a fleeting acknowledgement could unravel the fragile rules that kept her alive. Her imagination became both a refuge and a rebellion. Catherine created entire towns she would never see, rivers she would never touch, and companions drawn from shadows and whispers. The hidden wing became a world where she was free to explore, to question and to dream. Yet each creation reminded her of what she could never have: freedom, recognition, and the simple joy of being seen. The outside world existed as a tantalizing ghost, glimpsed only in shards of light and sound. One afternoon, as storm clouds gathered above the plantation, Catherine pressed her hand against the shuttered window. The wind rattled the panes. The rain lashed against the wood, and she imagined herself stepping outside, feeling the wet soil beneath her feet, letting the storm batter her hair and dress. For a fleeting moment she allowed herself to hope. Then came the weight of the rules: stay silent, stay invisible or be erased, and she retreated, hiding her longing beneath a mask of obedience. By the age of 8, Catherine had mastered the art of subtlety. Her silence was deliberate, her movements careful, her expressions carefully calibrated. She could anticipate her father's moods, mimic her siblings' social cues, and navigate the invisible rules of the house. But beneath this careful exterior, her mind burned with questions and strategies. Every day, she stored knowledge, noting weaknesses in the household's rigid hierarchy and secrets hidden even from those who wielded them. She understood, even at her age, that survival alone would not be enough. She had to be clever, patient, and always aware. Even Mary Ann, her mother, could only offer fragmented protection. Her love was real, but constrained by fear and obedience to her husband. Agnes, though loyal and vigilant, could not shield Catherine from every danger or misstep. The child's education in invisibility was therefore as much a psychological discipline as it was physical. She learned to read faces, to gauge threats, and to plan carefully before she moved or spoke. Each observation was another step toward understanding the world that had chosen to pretend she did not exist. The servants, though occasionally sympathetic, operated within their own fears. Some whispered about her in hushed tones, while others avoided her entirely, uncertain how to treat a girl who officially did not belong. Catherine's presence was a question mark, an enigma that challenged those around her without ever allowing them certainty. Even a new servant, unaware of the rules, could almost expose her existence in a careless moment. Such incidents reminded her constantly of the fragility of her world. Storms were both a threat and a temptation. On a particularly fierce evening, rain pounded the shutters and wind tore at the trees surrounding the house. Catherine pressed her face to the glass, imagining mud beneath her feet, water dripping from her hair, and the distant sound of laughter she would never hear. Each pounding drop of rain seemed to whisper of freedom, yet also carried a warning. The world outside was not hers to claim, not yet. The weight of the household's silence pressed down like the storm itself, heavy and unrelenting. In the quiet moments of night, Catherine's mind was a flurry of observation and imagination. She recounted the day's events, the tiny gestures, the fleeting interactions, and the patterns she had noticed. Agnes listened quietly, knowing that these whispered monologues were the only way. Catherine preserved her identity. Through them, she built a mental map of the household's dynamics, noting alliances, fears, and cracks in the carefully maintained control. Even in isolation, she was learning the subtle power of knowledge. Survival demanded constant awareness. Every footstep, every murmur, every glance could shift the balance. Catherine's world was a constant exercise in judgment, instinct, and patience. She understood that the house's grandeur and the family's wealth were illusions that masked cruelty and control. Her own life had been shaped by the deliberate erasure imposed by those who should have nurtured her. Yet she had discovered strength and resilience that few could comprehend. By 9, she had become nearly invisible in the house, yet fully aware of everything around her. She knew which doors to avoid, which words to never speak, and which gestures could betray her presence. The lessons of silence and observation had created a child who was simultaneously hidden and capable of profound insight. Her father, powerful and exacting, could not anticipate the mind she was cultivating in the shadows of his home. Even in secrecy, Catherine had begun to influence her world. Through observation, patience, and imagination, she understood more than anyone suspected. She watched the weaknesses, the fears, and the secrets of her family, learning that erasure could be both a cage and a weapon. Within the walls that sought to contain her, Catherine Abernathy was quietly becoming a force to be reckoned with, an awareness waiting for its moment to emerge from the shadows. The daughter they pretended never existed had already begun to chart her path. She understood cruelty, secrecy, and the subtle tyranny of appearance. She had learned to endure, to plan, and to observe, building the quiet strength that would carry her through the years when the family's long-held secrets began to crumble. Every shadow she walked through, every whispered word she heard, and every moment of invisibility shaped her, preparing her for the reckoning that would inevitably arrive. The first real danger came quietly, like a shadow slipping across the floor. Catherine had long known how fragile her world was, but she had never faced a threat that seemed so immediate and invisible. That morning, she had ventured a step closer to the main hall than usual, drawn by the muffled voices of visitors, a group of men in fine coats, their laughter echoing faintly through the thick walls. Something in their tone made her stomach tighten. They were strangers, outsiders, and her presence here was forbidden yet irresistible. She crouched behind the heavy curtain of the hidden wing, barely breathing as the voices grew louder. One of the men mentioned the Abernathy daughter, a daughter whose existence they claimed was only a rumor. Catherine's heart froze. Rumors were dangerous. The way they spoke, as though her presence might be a fabrication, confirmed what she had always suspected. Her very identity was a weapon, and everyone around her feared it. Agnes appeared silently at her side, her eyes dark with warning. "You must never be seen," she hissed. Catherine nodded, the old lesson pressing down like a stone in her chest. She understood instinctively that her curiosity, as strong as it was, could have consequences far beyond any she had yet imagined. Every secret she uncovered, every tiny slip, could unravel the fragile protection that had kept her alive all these years. Days passed with a new unspoken tension. Catherine moved through the hidden wing with even greater caution, memorizing every creak in the floor, every shadow that might betray her, every servant's routine. She noticed the subtle changes in her siblings, the way they lingered near the hallways she could not enter, the way their eyes darted nervously when the strangers visited. Every detail became a puzzle, and she was determined to solve it without revealing herself. Clive and Marianne, who had been her quiet sanctuary, seemed distracted. Catherine sensed the mother's own fears were mounting. There were whispered meetings in the main hall, hushed words exchanged behind closed doors, and a tension that hung in the air like the scent of a storm yet to arrive. Catherine did not understand everything, but she felt it, the shift in the household's rhythm, the unspoken dread that something was about to change. One evening a letter arrived, carried by a messenger from the neighboring county. Agnes intercepted it immediately, reading it with a frown before sliding it into a locked drawer. Catherine had never seen a letter handled with such gravity. "This is not for you to read," Agnes said, though her voice trembled slightly. Catherine's curiosity, sharper now than ever, burned. What could be so important that even she, the hidden daughter, was barred from knowing? The days that followed brought an undercurrent of fear and excitement. Catherine observed her father more closely than ever. William Abernathy, for all his composure, moved with an unusual rigidity, issuing instructions in terse, clipped sentences. The staff whispered about the letter, the strangers, and the delicate balance of appearances, and Catherine absorbed it all. She began to sense that the fragile illusion surrounding her life, the careful pretending that she did not exist, might be threatened from the outside. Then came the night that changed everything. Catherine had just finished her lessons in the hidden wing, tracing the lines of a map she had drawn of the surrounding lands, when a knock echoed softly against the outer door. She froze. No one ever knocked here. The sound was deliberate, measured. Agnes stiffened, her hand gripping Catherine's shoulder. "Stay still," she whispered. The door opened, just a crack, and a man's voice, a stranger, spoke low. Urgent words that Catherine could barely catch. "Is anyone here?" The tone carried no malice, only a pressing need. Catherine's pulse quickened. A stranger had found the wing, a place she had believed impossible to reach. Agnes moved with silent authority, stepping to block the view, her eyes warning Catherine to obey. The child's world, so carefully constructed over 8 years, suddenly felt perilously thin. For hours after, Catherine lay awake, listening to the wind outside and the occasional murmur from the main house. The encounter had shattered something fundamental, the illusion that she could remain completely hidden, the sense of invulnerability she had cultivated. Her careful mastery of observation and silence now felt fragile. A single misstep could expose her, and she understood that the consequences might be worse than she had ever imagined. Her mother noticed her agitation and tried to soothe her, but Catherine had changed. The brief glimpse of the unknown, the presence of someone aware of her hidden existence, sparked a dangerous curiosity. She began to consider questions she had never dared ask. Why must she remain hidden? What power did her father fear she possessed? And most frighteningly, could she find a way to turn the household secrecy to her own advantage? The days stretched on with a tension that made the air itself heavy. Catherine moved like a shadow, every gesture precise, every sound measured. She became increasingly aware of the vulnerabilities in her father's control, the cracks in the household's careful construction. The servants, the siblings, even her mother, all were pieces in a puzzle. She was beginning to see more clearly than they realized. She had learned, through years of enforced invisibility, the subtle influence of knowledge, the quiet weight of understanding, and the power of silence. One afternoon, as she traced the path of sunlight through the shuttered windows, Catherine realized that her imagination was no longer just a refuge, it was a rehearsal. She practiced scenarios of movement, speech, and escape. She imagined ways to gather information without being noticed, ways to influence the family she had been hidden from, and ways to prepare for the moment when her existence could no longer be denied. Even the storms that once symbolized her isolation now felt like opportunities. The wind howling through the eaves, the rain thrumming against the windows, the flicker of lightning across the fields, each element became a signal, a cue, a test of her awareness. She moved through the hidden wing with the precision of a strategist, noting every creak, every shadow, every opportunity that might arise in the coming months. By the time the first leaves of autumn began to fall, Catherine's understanding of her world had deepened in ways that frightened even Agnes. The girl had learned to anticipate danger, to read the intentions of those around her, and to manipulate what she could within the confines of her invisible existence. Yet for all her cunning, she remained aware of the ultimate truth. Her father's authority was absolute, and any mistake could erase her completely from the life she had carved out in shadows. The hidden daughter had, in these months of subtle crisis, discovered a new power, awareness. She understood the household's weaknesses, the fragility of appearances, and the silent influence she could wield simply by knowing more than anyone else. The world outside might pretend she did not exist, but within the walls she inhabited, Catherine Abernathy was becoming something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated, a mind awake, cunning, and aware of the weight of secrets. The following weeks brought a change so subtle that only Catherine noticed it. The household continued its rhythm of polite pretense, servants moving silently, siblings laughing in the sunlit fields, as if nothing had shifted. Yet Catherine felt the tension like a low hum in the walls. She had glimpsed the fragility of her hidden world, and now, every creak of the floorboards, every soft voice, every shadow, cast by flickering candlelight, felt like a test she could not afford to fail. Her father's manner had grown stricter, though outwardly he remained composed. He spoke less, watched more, and seemed to anticipate events before they unfolded. To the casual observer, he was the same formidable patriarch, a man of discipline and wealth. But Catherine could sense the undercurrent. He feared not rebellion, nor disobedience, but exposure. Her very presence, though invisible, was a threat to the illusions he had built over decades. She understood now that the careful erasure of her existence was not merely cruelty, it was protection for him, as twisted as it was, shielding his image from the truth she embodied. Catherine's mind, sharpened by months of careful observation, began to explore questions she had once suppressed. What if the rules were not absolute? What if her silence could be manipulated? Could she, for the first time, influence events beyond the wing, beyond the shadows, without revealing herself entirely? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. The hidden daughter, trained in the art of invisibility, was beginning to conceive a strategy that could change everything. Her first step was subtle. She tested the reactions of the household to small provocations. A misplaced book on the staircase, a carefully misaligned chair, a softly dropped utensil during dinner. Each action was measured to gauge responses without drawing attention. The servant stiffened or whispered. Her siblings glanced curiously but turned away, and her father's gaze, when it caught the slight disturbances, lingered longer than usual. Every reaction was a piece of a puzzle, a map of vulnerabilities she could exploit. At the same time, Catherine's imagination expanded into real-world strategy. She observed patterns in the visitors, noting the hours when the hallways were lightly guarded, when conversations drifted to trivialities, when doors were left ajar. Every observation became data. Every whispered rumor, every accidental glance became information. By the time she was 10, Catherine understood that survival and influence were intertwined. Knowledge itself was power, and her hidden existence gave her a vantage no one else could claim. Yet with knowledge came isolation. Catherine's mind raced, planning and calculating, while her heart ached with the longing she could not voice. She yearned for companionship, for recognition, for a life beyond the heavy curtains and shuttered windows. The servants, kind as some were, could never bridge the gap, and Marianne's love, though deep, was bound by fear and obedience. Agnes remained her anchor, her only ally in the labyrinth of secrecy. Yet even she could not grant the freedom Catherine craved. It was during this period of acute awareness that Catherine first discovered the letters. They were hidden in a drawer in her mother's room, addressed to someone Catherine had never heard of. Agnes intercepted the first batch, but Catherine had been watching carefully. One night, when the household slept under a heavy thunderstorm, she retrieved a single letter, candlelight flickering against her careful fingers. The handwriting was elegant, urgent, and personal, revealing a network of secrets far beyond what she had imagined. Her heart raced as she read. The letters spoke of deals, betrayals, and alliances, of promises made and broken, of wealth and influence guarded jealously. But among the veiled instructions and requests, Catherine saw references to her father's hidden anxieties, the fragile image he maintained, and, most surprisingly, hints about a daughter whose existence must never be acknowledged. Her pulse quickened. She was reading about herself, the girl erased from family memory, documented only in secrecy and fear. The implications were staggering. If anyone else learned of these letters, of these references, it could destabilize the household entirely. Catherine realized she was holding the keys to a hidden world, a world of secrets that even her father could not control completely. The power was intoxicating yet dangerous. One misstep, one careless revelation, and the fragile illusion of the Abernathy family could shatter, and she, the hidden daughter, could be destroyed along with it. From that night onward, Catherine's perception of the house transformed. She no longer saw the wing as a prison, but as a vantage point, a command center from which she could map the dynamics of her family. She memorized conversations, noted the fleeting expressions of her father and siblings, and catalogued the servants' loyalties and fears. Her imagination, once a refuge, now became an instrument of strategy, blending creativity with observation in a way that few could comprehend. Even her mother, though unaware of the full scope of Catherine's discovery, became more cautious. Marianne's conversations carried subtle warnings, her tone weighted with worry. Catherine learned to interpret these nuances, realizing that the adult world was a web of veiled threats and hidden motives. She saw that silence and knowledge were intertwined, that survival depended not only on hiding but on understanding and anticipating every ripple caused by her presence. By the end of the autumn, Catherine had changed. She was no longer simply a hidden girl living in shadows. She was a strategist, a student of the household's invisible laws. She had begun to see the fragility, of the forces around her, the cracks in her father's authority, the vulnerabilities in the servant's loyalty, the unspoken desires and fears of her siblings. Every observation, every subtle act of influence, was another step toward a future in which she might assert herself without shattering the delicate balance that had protected her for so long. Storms continued to be both her torment and her teacher. During a late October thunderstorm, she crouched by the shuttered window, watching the rain streak the panes and listening to the wind tear at the roof. She imagined the world outside, the freedom of the fields, the life she had never known, and simultaneously understood that the storm mirrored her own existence, constrained, turbulent, yet full of potential energy, ready to be unleashed when the moment came. Catherine Abernathy, the daughter they pretended never existed, had entered a new phase of understanding. The hidden life she had endured for 10 years had sharpened her senses, strengthened her mind, and awakened a strategic awareness that few could anticipate. She had discovered the potency of knowledge, the fragility of appearances, and the silent power inherent in invisibility. Within the walls designed to erase her, she had begun to cultivate control, insight, and patience, the tools she would need for the challenges yet to come. The household remained unaware of the shift, yet Catherine knew it was inevitable. Secrets, after all, have a way of surfacing, and those who are hidden too long often find themselves at the center of revelations they cannot ignore. As autumn deepened and the first chill crept into the corridors, Catherine prepared herself for the next phase of her hidden life, a cetium life where observation, knowledge, and cunning would become her weapons in a world determined to pretend she did not exist. The first opportunity came unexpectedly, the kind of small opening that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. Her visitor from a neighboring county had arrived, a man with sharp eyes and a confident gait, his carriage parked haphazardly along the edge of the Abernathy grounds. The adults in the house busied themselves with pleasantries, arranging the drawing room as though no misstep could be tolerated. Catherine watched from the shadows, her pulse quickening. Every step, every glance, every whisper was an event to observe, a puzzle to decipher. The man spoke of business, trade, and matters Catherine only partially understood, yet she caught the nuances of fear, expectation, and subtle tension in the voices around her. Her father, usually so composed, moved with a stiffness she had never seen. The men in the room, accustomed to the Abernathy reputation, seemed uncertain, as if sensing undercurrents they could not name. Catherine realized, with a mixture of thrill and caution, that the hidden world she inhabited was more fragile than she had imagined, and the smallest action could ripple into consequences far beyond her wing. For the first time, she tested the limits of her invisibility. A dropped quill, a slight rearrangement of a chair, a silent adjustment to the folds of a curtain, each movement calculated to attract the faintest notice without drawing full attention. The household responded in subtle ways, a murmur here, a glance there, but no alarm. Catherine noted every reaction, storing each detail like a map of the invisible forces at play. The realization settled in her mind. She could act without being seen, influence without being acknowledged, and wield a power that no one had considered possible. Agnes observed quietly, her face a mask of concern, but she allowed Catherine these small exercises. "You are learning the delicate dance," she whispered one evening, her eyes narrowing with warning. "But remember, even shadows can be stepped on." Catherine nodded, her mind alight with possibilities. She had survived by silence. Now she could begin to shape the household through careful observation and minor interventions. Her strategies became more ambitious. She noticed which servants were loyal, which were easily frightened, and which might be persuaded to act without understanding the full implications. She observed her siblings' routines, identifying moments when their attention was elsewhere, and catalogued her father's habits, noting times when his control was weakest. Every observation was a potential lever, a subtle way to influence events without revealing herself. Even the garden, once a refuge of imagination, became a testing ground. Catherine studied the pathways, the timing of the sun, the growth patterns of plants, and the movement of workers. She used these observations to plan small interventions, moving a tool here, leaving a note of sorts there, each designed to test reactions, gather information, and manipulate outcomes while remaining invisible. Her hidden existence, once a limitation, was now a tactical advantage. One night the storm returned, fierce and unrelenting. Catherine pressed herself against the shutters, listening to the wind tear at the roof and the rain batter the walls. She imagined the possibilities of the household laid bare, the consequences of secrets unmasked, and the power she could exert without stepping fully into the light. The storm became a companion, a reflection of her inner turbulence, and the growing ambition that had quietly taken root. Her mother, Marianne, seemed increasingly anxious, her own movements cautious and calculated. Catherine noticed the subtle tension in her tone, the careful selection of words, the glances toward locked drawers and hidden corridors. Even in her invisibility, Catherine began to read her mother's emotions and intentions, adding them to her ever-growing map of the household's unseen dynamics. Knowledge, she realized, was more powerful than obedience. The turning point came when Catherine observed a heated discussion between her father and the visiting man. Words were clipped, gestures sharp, and the air thick with unspoken threats. Catherine catalogued every nuance, the way William's jaw tightened, the slight tremor in the other man's hand, the servant's subtle movements of avoidance. From the shadows, she began to understand the balance of fear, authority, and reputation that held the Abernathy household together. She realized that by understanding the cracks, she could predict outcomes, manipulate behavior, and protect herself in ways no one expected. As autumn deepened, Catherine's awareness of her own power grew. She had moved beyond passive observation. She was beginning to see how she could influence events without being acknowledged, how her presence could ripple silently through the house. Even Agnes, seasoned and wary, recognized the subtle shift in the child she had protected for so many years. Catherine had become a strategist, navigating a world of secrecy, manipulation, and fragile authority with precision far beyond her years. The hidden daughter was no longer simply surviving, she was learning to shape her world from within the shadows. She understood the value of patience, the weight of silence, and the subtle art of influence. Every action, every observation, every careful intervention added to a growing map of power that existed only in her mind, a network of knowledge she could wield when the time was right. And though the world outside the wing remained closed, the household itself was becoming her landscape. Every storm, every whispered conversation, every fleeting glance of suspicion or fear became a lesson. Catherine Abernathy, the daughter they pretended never existed, had begun to discover that invisibility was not weakness. It was a weapon, a vantage, and a tool she could use to navigate the fragile, dangerous world around her. Autumn deepened, and with it came a subtle shift in the household's atmosphere. The veneer of control William Abernathy maintained began to show cracks, though no one dared acknowledge them aloud. Catherine, from her hidden vantage, observed every subtle tremor in the carefully constructed hierarchy. The house was a map of fear, habit, and loyalty, and she was beginning to understand it in ways no one suspected. One evening, as the last rays of the sun slipped beneath the horizon, Catherine noticed a pattern that had escaped her before. A hidden corridor behind the library, a narrow passage rarely used and overlooked even by the staff. She had discovered it by following the faint drafts of air that carried whispers from one room to another. The corridor led to a small study, a place where papers were stacked in careful disorder, locked drawers and cabinets sealed with tiny keys. It was the heart of secrets, the private domain her father believed was inaccessible. Curiosity, tempered by years of caution, surged within her. She knew that entering this hidden room carried unimaginable risk. If caught, she could be punished, erased, or worse, exposed to the very people who had long pretended she did not exist. Yet the pull was irresistible. The room promised knowledge, the kind that could tip the balance of her existence. Carefully, she memorized the locks, the placement of the furniture, the sounds of footsteps above, and the timing of servants' routines. Every detail mattered. In the days that followed, Catherine devised her plan. She moved silently, timing her steps between the muffled noises of the house, concealing her presence even as she approached the threshold of forbidden knowledge. Her pulse thrummed in rhythm with the ticking of the grandfather clock, each second measured, each moment a calculated risk. This was no longer mere observation. It was preparation for action, a step beyond invisibility into subtle agency. The opportunity came one stormy night, when rain lashed the windows and wind rattled the shutters with a fury that seemed almost alive. The household was preoccupied. Servants hurried to secure the grounds. Her father dealt with correspondence, and her siblings had retired early. Tired from the day's activity, Catherine slipped from her wing, heart pounding, and traced the corridor she had memorized, moving with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every movement countless times. The study smelled of dust, ink, and secrecy. Papers littered the desk, each one a potential revelation, each drawer a vault of hidden truths. Catherine's small hands trembled as she opened a cabinet, discovering letters and ledgers that spoke of deals, debts and promises made behind closed doors. Names were listed with precise calculations of wealth, of property, of influence. And then, among the meticulous records, she found references to her own existence. Her birth noted in careful, guarded handwriting, then deliberately crossed out, marked as to be concealed, as if erasure could negate reality. Shock and exhilaration collided within her. Here, in this forbidden place, Catherine had tangible proof of the deliberate denial she had endured her entire life. Her father's obsession with appearances, his meticulous control, and the silent cruelty of pretending she did not exist were all laid bare. But along with anger and betrayal came understanding. Knowledge was her weapon, invisibility her shield. With this information, she could navigate the household not merely as a ghost, but as a presence whose intellect and insight could shape events. Days passed in heightened vigilance. Catherine studied the documents in secret, committing names, numbers, and arrangements to memory. Each revelation revealed not only the extent of her father's manipulation, but also the fragile network of loyalties and fears that bound the household together. She noted the servants' tendencies, her siblings' naive assumptions, and her mother's cautious interventions. Everything became a map of potential advantage, every detail a lever for influence. Yet danger had a way of lurking in the margins. Catherine soon realized that she was not entirely unseen. A servant, unfamiliar with her routine, lingered longer than expected near her wing. The girl froze, heart racing, as the adult approached the doorway. But instead of discovering her secret, the servant moved on, distracted by another task. Relief was immediate, yet it reminded Catherine of the constant vigilance required to survive. One mistake could undo years of careful planning. By late autumn, Catherine had become an invisible strategist within her own home. Her understanding of the family's hierarchy, the network of secrets, and the delicate balance of appearances was unprecedented. She knew which arguments her father could not endure, which servants could be persuaded to act subtly, and how to anticipate her siblings' missteps. She had transformed her invisibility into influence, the hidden daughter, becoming an architect of events she had once been powerless to affect. The turning point came with a letter that arrived unexpectedly from the neighboring county. Catherine intercepted it first, careful to ensure no one saw her. The handwriting was familiar, urgent, and laced with warnings. The content hinted at dealings and betrayals beyond her previous understanding, alliances that could shift the balance of power within the household. Even William Abernathy, formidable as he was, might be vulnerable if the wrong secrets were exposed. Catherine's mind raced. For the first time, she realized that she could act not only to protect herself but to reshape the fragile dynamics of her world. Storms, which had once symbolized confinement, now became tools of concealment. Rain and wind masked her movements. Lightning illuminated paths for observation, and thunder drowned the smallest sounds of discovery. Catherine used each storm to further her understanding, venturing subtly into spaces once forbidden, testing boundaries, and gathering intelligence that would allow her to operate with greater freedom. Through all of this, Catherine's understanding of power deepened. She realized that the household's authority was an illusion, maintained by fear, appearances, and compliance. By carefully studying these patterns, she could predict reactions, manipulate outcomes, and safeguard her own existence while remaining unacknowledged. Invisibility, she discovered, was not limitation. It was the ultimate form of leverage. As the first frost dusted the plantation fields, Catherine felt a profound shift within herself. The hidden daughter, long trained to survive, had grown into something more: a strategist, an observer, and a force capable of subtle influence. She had transformed the solitude of her confinement into a sanctuary of knowledge, preparing for the inevitable moment when secrets could no longer remain buried within the walls designed to erase her. Catherine had discovered not just survival, but the quiet power of insight and patience, the tools that would define her path in the months and years to come. Winter had begun to creep over the Abernathy plantation, its chill seeping through the shuttered windows and into every corner of the hidden wing. The house, once a place of routine and strict hierarchy, now felt like a landscape mapped entirely by Catherine's understanding. She knew every step, every habit, every weakness. The secrets she had uncovered, the letters, the ledgers, the hidden correspondences, were no longer mere curiosities. They were tools, and she was poised to use them. The first shift came subtly. A servant misplaced a ledger, leaving it near the edge of the library desk. Catherine had observed the careful placement of such papers for months. The deviation was glaring to her trained eyes. She retrieved the document with stealth and read it by candlelight, discovering a web of debts and clandestine agreements that implicated not only her father, but extended branches of the family she had never met. The realization hit her. The house's stability depended on ignorance, and she possessed knowledge that could unravel it entirely. She began acting with intention, using her invisibility to influence small events that, taken together, shifted the household's balance. A strategically forgotten letter left for the wrong eyes, a softly nudged chair that forced a servant to reveal a secret, a misplaced item that triggered subtle confrontations. Each maneuver was calculated, measured, and precise. The family, oblivious to her orchestration, began to feel unease without knowing its source. Fear, once directed outward to maintain control, now had an unseen catalyst. Marianne noticed the first signs. Her mother's eyes lingered on Catherine with suspicion and concern. Yet Catherine's careful mimicry of obedience and innocence concealed her growing agency. Even Agnes, ever cautious, recognized that the girl was no longer merely surviving. She was shaping events, weaving influence through the threads of secrecy she had spent years observing. Silence had become her instrument, observation her strategy, and knowledge her power. The most dangerous test came during a gathering in the main hall. A relative of considerable wealth and influence had arrived, bringing with him gossip, veiled threats, and an awareness of the Abernathy family's delicate reputations. Catherine, concealed in a shadowed corner, noted every gesture, every hesitant glance, and every slip of language. She saw her father's composure falter in a way she had never witnessed, realized which servants were untrustworthy under pressure, and predicted the reactions of each adult in the room with chilling accuracy. By the end of the evening, she had quietly redirected the outcome of the conversations, preventing a potential disaster without ever revealing herself. The letters she had discovered months before became her secret arsenal. Catherine began to connect names, promises, and betrayals, creating a mental network of influence that spanned the household and beyond. She saw opportunities to assert subtle pressure on her father, guide her siblings' decisions without their knowledge, and manipulate events so that the Abernathy family remained unaware of the true force shaping their world. Invisibility, she realized, was not a limitation, it was leverage. Yet danger remained ever present. William Abernathy's vigilance never wavered, and he sensed a shift he could not name. The delicate balance of obedience, fear, and appearances was being tested by a presence he could neither see nor fully comprehend. Catherine understood that discovery would have consequences far beyond punishment. Exposure could erase her entirely, undoing the careful strategies she had spent years constructing. Every maneuver, therefore, was executed with exacting precision, a combination of courage, intellect, and timing honed by years of isolation. In the quiet hours, Catherine continued to refine her understanding of influence and power. The household, once a place of confinement and fear, had become a living laboratory for observation and control. She catalogued loyalties, predicted conflicts, and learned the subtle art of shaping events from behind the curtain. Every secret she uncovered was a tool, every insight a potential safeguard. In this careful orchestration, Catherine discovered an unexpected truth. Her invisibility was not merely survival, it was dominion in disguise. The turning point of the season arrived with a confrontation neither Catherine nor the family could have anticipated. A dispute over a shipment of goods exposed the cracks in William Abernathy's authority. Words were exchanged sharply, accusations whispered, and the family's cultivated appearances threatened to collapse. Catherine, observing every detail, intervened indirectly. A nudge here, a subtle misplacement there, a hint of information to the right servant at the right moment. The conflict resolved without direct confrontation, yet the outcome clearly bore her unseen hand. By the end of winter, Catherine had achieved something remarkable. She had transformed from a hidden, erased child into a subtle architect of the household's dynamics. Her father, powerful and vigilant as he was, remained unaware of the invisible influence that guided events. Her mother, though cautious, began to rely on her insight unknowingly. The servants, manipulated through observation and gentle redirection, moved as if guided by invisible strings, and Catherine herself had discovered a truth that would define her life. Being unseen did not mean being powerless. The daughter they had pretended never existed was, in fact, the one who now held the quiet mastery of the household. Every secret catalogued, every pattern understood, every manipulation executed perfectly. Catherine had become an unseen force, a strategist shaped by erasure, invisibility, and survival. The storm of her childhood had not destroyed her. It had forged her into something far more formidable than anyone in the Abernathy household could imagine. And though the world beyond the plantation remained closed to her, Catherine knew that her power, carefully cultivated, could extend far beyond the walls that had confined her. In the shadows, she had learned the ultimate lesson: knowledge, patience, and observation were weapons more potent than any authority, and she had mastered them completely. The daughter they had pretended never existed had become a presence no one could ignore,